Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Easy English StoryLab. Today, we will practice English with a shadowing English story for B2 to C1 learners. Listen carefully. Pause the video. Repeat after me. Copy the pronunciation, rhythm, and emotion. But first, imagine this. What would you do if you suddenly found a secret door inside your apartment, and behind that door, a hidden corridor inside the walls? Let's begin the story. When I moved into my new apartment, I thought my biggest challenge would be adjusting to the noise of the city. I had just relocated to Chicago for a new job, leaving behind the quiet coastal town where I had spent most of my life. Everything felt unfamiliar. The crowded trains, the tall buildings, the constant hum of traffic, even late at night. Still, my apartment felt like a small refuge in the middle of all that chaos. It wasn't large, but it had character. The building itself was old, probably built sometime in the 1920s. The floors creaked when I walked across them, the windows were tall and narrow, and the walls were thick enough that I could barely hear my neighbors. I actually liked that about it. The apartment felt as though it had a story, as though dozens of lives had passed through it before mine. My name is Elena, and I'm an architectural researcher. My job involves studying old buildings, their history, and how cities evolve over time. Ironically, I had never expected to discover something mysterious inside my own apartment. For the first 2 weeks, everything seemed perfectly ordinary. I unpacked my boxes, arranged my bookshelves, and slowly turned the empty space into something that felt like home. My living room faced the street, where yellow taxis passed constantly, and at night the city lights reflected against the glass. My bedroom was smaller, quieter, and tucked toward the back of the building. That's where things started to feel strange. It began with a sound. One night, as I was reading in bed, I heard a faint hollow noise from somewhere inside the wall. It sounded like a soft knock, or maybe the echo of pipes shifting. Old buildings often make noises, so I didn't think much about it. But the sound came again the next night, and the night after that. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct. A dull, hollow thump that seemed to come from the same part of the wall every time. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. One evening after work, I decided to examine the wall more closely. The sound always seemed to come from the corner of the bedroom, right behind a tall wooden bookshelf I had placed there when I moved in. I pushed the bookshelf aside. Behind it was a plain section of wall, painted the same neutral beige as the rest of the room. Nothing unusual. Still, when I tapped lightly on the surface, something caught my attention. The wall sounded hollow, not solid like the others. At first, I assumed there might be an empty space for pipes or ventilation behind it. But when I ran my hand along the paint, I noticed something even stranger. There was a faint outline, a rectangle. Very subtle, almost impossible to notice unless you were looking for it. My heart started beating faster. "Is this a door?" I whispered to myself. I stepped back and examined the shape again. The outline was about 6 feet tall and maybe 2 feet wide. The edges were barely visible, as though someone had carefully painted over them years ago to hide them. But the shape was unmistakable. There was something behind this wall. I searched along the edges with my fingers, feeling for any kind of handle or latch. Nothing. No knob, no keyhole, no hinges, just smooth painted wood. For a moment, I considered the possibility that it was simply part of the building's structure, maybe an old storage panel that had been sealed decades ago.
But then I noticed something else. Near the lower corner of the rectangle, hidden beneath several layers of paint, there was a small metal indentation, a keyhole. My breath caught. Why would there be a keyhole in the middle of my bedroom wall? I sat on the floor and stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it. After all, I had only moved in 2 weeks ago. Maybe there was a perfectly logical explanation. Maybe the landlord knew about it. But another part of me, the part of me that loved old buildings and hidden architectural details, felt an overwhelming curiosity.
This building was nearly a century old. What if this door had been hidden here for decades? What if no one had opened it in years? That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined what could be behind the door: a storage room, an old maintenance corridor, or something else entirely. The next morning, I decided to ask the building manager. His name was Harold, an older man who had worked in the building for nearly 20 years. When I mentioned the door, his reaction surprised me. "A door?" he repeated. "Yes," I said, "in my bedroom wall." He frowned. "I've never heard about a door in that unit." "But there's a keyhole," I insisted. Harold shook his head slowly. "That building's been renovated several times. If there was something like that, it was probably sealed up years ago." "Do you have the key?" I asked. He chuckled. "I doubt it." His casual reaction should have reassured me. Instead, it made me even more curious. If the building manager didn't know about the door, then who did? That evening, I returned to my apartment with a strange mixture of excitement and nervousness. The hidden rectangle in the wall seemed more obvious now, almost as if the apartment itself was waiting for me to discover it. I knelt down again and examined the keyhole. It was small and old-fashioned, the kind you might find in furniture from another era. There was no key, but maybe I didn't need one. After searching through my kitchen drawer, I found a thin metal tool from a small repair kit. My hands trembled slightly as I inserted it into the keyhole. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I felt a soft click. The sound echoed quietly inside the wall. I froze. Slowly, cautiously, I pushed against the edge of the hidden door. For a second, it didn't move. Then the panel shifted. Dust drifted into the air as the door opened inward, revealing a narrow darkness beyond the wall. A cold draft brushed against my face. The space behind the door was not a storage closet. It was a corridor, a narrow passageway stretching into darkness. My heart began pounding because this corridor clearly did not belong to my apartment. And judging by the thick layer of dust on the floor, no one had walked through it in a very long time. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam of light disappeared into the narrow hallway, and at the far end of it, I saw another door. For several seconds, I simply stood there, staring into the narrow corridor behind the hidden door. My phone's flashlight illuminated a thin tunnel of space that clearly had not been used for many years. Dust floated slowly through the beam of light, and the air smelled dry and stale, like an attic that had been closed for decades. My first instinct was to close the door and pretend I had never found it, but curiosity has always been my weakness, especially when it comes to old buildings. I stepped forward. The wooden floor creaked softly beneath my weight as I crossed the threshold and entered the corridor. The hidden door behind me remained open, casting a faint glow from my bedroom into the darkness. The passageway was surprisingly narrow. The ceiling was low enough that I had to tilt my head slightly as I walked. The walls were unfinished wood and brick, completely different from the painted interior of my apartment. It looked like this space had been built long before the modern layout of the building, which meant one thing. This corridor was probably never meant for residents to find. I moved slowly, shining my flashlight along the floor. The dust layer was thick, but something about it made my stomach tighten. There were marks in it, not clear footprints, but disturbances in the dust, as if something had brushed across the surface some time in the past, maybe years ago, maybe not. I told myself it was nothing. Old buildings settle, things shift. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping into my chest. The corridor extended for maybe 20 feet before reaching the second door I had seen earlier. Up close, it looked older than the hidden door in my bedroom wall. The wood was darker, scratched in places, and the metal handle had turned dull with age. There was no keyhole this time, just a handle. I hesitated. 1,000 thoughts ran through my mind. What if this led into another apartment? What if someone was on the other side? Or worse, what if this part of the building wasn't supposed to exist anymore? I took a slow breath and placed my hand on the handle. It felt cold. For a moment, I simply stood there, listening. The building around me was quiet. No voices, no footsteps, just the faint hum of the city somewhere far beyond the walls. Finally, I pushed the handle down. The door opened slowly with a long, dry creak. My flashlight revealed a room on the other side. It was small, maybe the size of a walk-in closet, but it was clearly not a storage space. There was furniture inside, a wooden desk, a chair, and shelves lining the walls. For a moment, I thought I had stepped back in time. The room looked untouched for decades. A thin layer of dust covered everything, but the objects themselves were still intact. I stepped inside carefully. The floorboards groaned softly beneath my feet. On the desk sat an old typewriter, the kind you see in black and white photographs. Beside it was a stack of yellowed paper. My curiosity deepened. Who would build a secret room inside an apartment building, and why? I moved closer to the desk and brushed a thin layer of dust away from the papers. The top page contained typed words. The letters were faded, but still readable. It looked like a journal entry. At the top of the page was a date, October 12th, 1963. I blinked. 1963, more than 60 years ago. I carefully lifted the paper and began reading. The entry was written in short paragraphs, almost like someone recording daily observations. But the content was strange. It described the building, the tenants, their routines, their conversations. At first, I assumed it was written by a building manager, but as I read further, something about the tone made my skin prickle. The writer wasn't just managing the building, they were watching people. Closely. Too closely. I flipped through several more pages. Each one contained notes about different residents. What time they left for work, who visited them, how often they argued, what they talked about in the hallway. The level of detail was unsettling. Whoever wrote these entries had been observing everyone in the building with disturbing precision. And then I saw something that made my breath catch. One of the pages had a small map drawn in the corner, a rough sketch of the building's layout, hidden corridors, secret access points, small passages between apartments, including the one I had just used. My heart began pounding. This wasn't just a secret room. It was part of a hidden network built inside the walls of the building. But for what purpose? I continued flipping through the papers. Toward the bottom of the stack, the entries became shorter, more urgent, almost paranoid. One sentence caught my attention immediately.
They are beginning to notice the sounds in the walls. A chill ran down my spine. The sounds, the same hollow noises I had heard at night. I kept reading. The final page in the stack was dated November 3, 1963. The writing was less steady, the sentence spacing uneven, as if the person typing it had been nervous or afraid. The final line read, "If anyone ever finds this room, the corridors must be sealed. No one should know how easily every apartment in this building can be reached." My stomach dropped. Slowly, I looked back toward the corridor I had just walked through. If the map was accurate, this passage might not be the only one. There could be others, hidden throughout the entire building, watching, listening, connecting every apartment. A quiet sound echoed somewhere deep within the corridor. Not loud, just a soft shift of wood. I froze. My flashlight beam trembled slightly as I turned toward the hallway. For a moment, everything was silent. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The dust on the floor of the corridor had changed. There were now clear footprints leading toward the room. Footprints that definitely had not been there when I first walked in, and they were not mine, because they were coming from the opposite direction, from deeper inside the passage, as if someone else had just walked through the hidden corridor, toward me.
For a few seconds, I couldn't move. My flashlight trembled slightly in my hand as I stared at the footprints in the dust. They were clear, fresh, and they were not mine. I looked down at my own shoes. My footprints were leading toward the room, but the new ones were coming from the opposite direction, deeper inside the corridor, which meant only one thing. Someone else had been walking through the hidden passage, very recently. A cold sensation ran down my spine. The narrow corridor suddenly felt much smaller, much darker than before. I slowly raised my phone and pointed the flashlight farther down the passageway. The beam of light stretched into the darkness, but it didn't reach the end. I swallowed. "Hello?" I called out carefully. My voice echoed softly against the brick walls. No answer. For a moment, I considered turning around immediately and running back into my apartment, but something stopped me. Curiosity again. Or maybe stubbornness. I took one cautious step forward, then another. The dust on the floor shifted quietly beneath my shoes. The corridor continued farther than I had expected. The wooden beams above me looked old and fragile, and small fragments of plaster had fallen from the ceiling over time. I followed the footprints slowly. Each step made my heart beat faster. Eventually, the passage opened into a slightly wider space, almost like a small junction between corridors. My flashlight revealed something surprising. There were multiple pathways. 3 narrow corridors connected here, forming a hidden intersection inside the walls of the building. I stared in disbelief. "This place is enormous," I whispered. If the old map in the room was accurate, these corridors might run through the entire structure. Every apartment, every floor. Anyone using them could move silently through the building without ever being seen. The thought made my stomach tighten. I looked back down at the footprints. They continued along the corridor to my left. Slowly, carefully, I followed them. The air grew colder as I moved deeper into the passageway. At one point, I noticed a small metal vent in the wall. Through it, I could faintly hear voices. People talking, laughing. Probably the residents of another apartment. Which meant I was now walking directly behind someone's living room wall. The realization felt deeply unsettling. The person who built these corridors must have been able to hear everything, every conversation, every private moment. No wonder the journal entries had been so detailed. Finally, the corridor ended at another door. This one looked newer than the others. The wood was smoother and the handle wasn't as worn. The footprints stopped directly in front of it. I stared at the door for several seconds. Someone had come through here recently. But where did it lead? Slowly, I reached for the handle. My hand hesitated. Then I pushed it open. The door swung outward quietly, and suddenly I was standing inside a brightly lit hallway. For a moment, my eyes struggled to adjust. Then I realized where I was. The building's public hallway, just outside another apartment. I stepped out carefully and looked around. The corridor was empty. The carpet was clean and modern, completely different from the dusty passages hidden behind the walls. The apartment number next to the door read 3B. My apartment was 3F, which meant the hidden corridor connected multiple units on the same floor. I quickly closed the door behind me. From this side, it looked completely normal, just another apartment door. No sign that it connected to secret passages inside the walls. I stood there for a moment, thinking. Someone had walked through those corridors before me. Someone who clearly knew about them. But who? The journal I had found was from 1963. That person was probably long gone. Yet the fresh footprints proved something important. The secret had not disappeared. Someone else in this building knew about the hidden network, and they were still using it. That night, I returned to my apartment and locked the hidden door carefully. I pushed the bookshelf back in front of it. But sleep did not come easily. My mind kept replaying everything I had discovered: the secret corridors, the journal, the footprints, and the feeling that someone else had been there just minutes before me. The next morning, I decided to return to the hidden room. This time, I brought a small camera with me. If there really was a hidden system of corridors running through the building, I wanted to document it. But when I opened the door behind my bookshelf and stepped into the passage, I stopped immediately. The corridor was different. The dust was gone, not completely, but enough to notice. And something else had changed. The room with the typewriter, the one with the journal, it was empty. The desk was gone, the chair was gone, the shelves were gone, as if the room had been cleared overnight. My heart started racing. Someone had been here. Not years ago, not months ago, last night. And they had taken everything. All that remained was the bare wooden floor and the silent walls. But just before I turned to leave, I noticed something lying on the ground near the doorway, a small folded piece of paper. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a short message written in neat handwriting. "You weren't supposed to find this." Under the sentence was another line. "Now that you have, we need to talk." And below that, an apartment number, 4C. I stared at the paper for a long time, because whoever left that message clearly knew something important. They knew about the hidden corridors. They knew I had discovered them,
and now they wanted to meet.
Great job! You finished today's English story. Now it's time to practice with the shadowing technique. Play the video again. Pause after each sentence. Repeat out loud. Copy the pronunciation, rhythm, and emotion. This method will help you speak English more naturally and confidently. What would you do if you discovered a secret door in your apartment? Write your answer in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with a friend who is learning English. See you in the next story.